Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, as always, Stan McCune, realtor right here in the Greenville area of South Carolina. And you can find all of my contact information in the show notes if you need to reach out to me for any of your real estate needs. And just a reminder, as always, if you enjoy this show, if you benefit from it, please subscribe, rate, review, comment, like. Whatever platform you're watching or listening to it on, please support the show in that one way. I would greatly, greatly appreciate if you guys could just take a second to just do that. Today, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a different show. We just had on, March the 7th, so just this past week, President Biden gave his State of the Union. He had some very interesting proposals for the housing market, some of which I like, some of which I don't like. And as you guys know, or at least you guys that listen to the show with regularity know, I'm very involved with politics, very interested in politics. I'm kind of non-affiliated. I have supported Democrats, I've supported Republicans, I've supported independents. I take my vote to whoever is closest to my personal beliefs politically, which is not very many politicians that are out there. And so I am not doing this to either support or to trash our current president, or to throw support towards anyone else. This is simply me looking at what President Biden said in his State of the Union about housing and discussing what I think about it. Because I think that they're right now, I think that we're in an inflection point. And there is a lot of momentum right now in Washington to make a lot of housing related things that have been local for years upon years, to make those things national. And some of that is because of Washington trying to absorb as much power as they can. And some of that is simply because there are systemic problems that are nationwide problems that local municipalities are simply not taking seriously or not able to affect direct change themselves. And so we're seeing more and more momentum for the federal government to get involved in the housing market. They already have in multiple ways over the past few years. And of course, we already know what the Federal Reserve is doing when it comes to mortgage rates. And they obviously impact the housing market a tremendous amount with what they do. But it's very interesting when in the State of the Union, the president discusses something housing related. So I just want to jump right in and discuss actually what the president said. And we're going to actually start by listening to what the president said. So if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to share my screen with the YouTube video. And, well, hold on one second. I need to make sure I do this right, because there's a certain way I have to do it where I share my sound. Here we go. Share sound. All right. Here we go.
I know the cost of housing is so important to you. If inflation keeps coming down, mortgage rates will come down as well, and the Fed acknowledges that. But I'm not waiting. I want to provide an annual tax credit that will give Americans $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down, to put toward their mortgages when they buy their first home or trade up for a little more space. Just for 2 years. And my administration is also eliminating title insurance on federally backed mortgages. When you refinance your home, you can save $1,000 or more as a consequence. For millions of renters, we're cracking down on big landlords who use antitrust law, who break antitrust laws by price fixing and driving up rents. We've cut red tape so builders can get federally financing, which is already helping build a record 1.7 million new housing units nationwide. Now pass and build and renovate 2 million affordable homes and bring those rents down.
All right, so there you go. There you heard it. Sorry if there was a little bit of an echo when I spoke there. I have never done the screen sharing thing when it comes to. Whoops. I just pressed the video going again here. Sorry about that. I've never done the video sharing thing, so I apologize for those of you on YouTube. Oh, and it looks like my audio just stopped. Let me fix that here. If you're watching on YouTube, you're going to get a little bit of a inside look as to how this happens, because I'm going to have to start over here with the audio. If you guys are longtime listeners or watchers, you know, I do not edit the video on this. So what you see is what you get. I do not have time for video editing. Maybe that'll come in the future, but I'm going to start over here with the audio for a split second here. All right. So there you have it. That was President Biden's statements from the State of the Union on the housing market and what he intends to do in order to fix it. Now, I have several thoughts about this, but I want to actually take his statement and his, all these little statements line by line to discuss what I think about what he had to say. And here is what I think, just starting from the top. So he starts by saying, I know the cost of housing is so important to you. He's speaking to my generation, really. My generation, which would be the millennial generation. He's probably speaking to Gen Z as well. And he knows he needs to he's not polling super well with the younger crowd, particularly the under 30 crowd. He needs to get those votes up. His speech, if we could take a little bit of an aside from this being a show about Greenville real estate, just my personal opinion, his speech was kind of all over the map. If you're a below 30-year-old person, you probably liked half of what he said, perhaps, and half of it you probably hated. But he knew that the cost of housing was something that is going to be a hot button topic for a lot of people. And so I think it was wise for him to address it. He said, if inflation keeps coming down, mortgage rates will come down as well. And he stated that the Fed is in agreement with him on that. That goes without saying. Now, what he didn't say is that most likely for all of that to happen is the economy has to worsen, right? And we've talked about that. If you're a listener on the show, you already know that, okay? If inflation keeps coming down, mortgage rates will come down as well. True, but impartially true statement, if I'm going to fact check him on this. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He said, but I'm not waiting. I want to provide an annual tax credit that will give Americans $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down to put towards their mortgage when they buy a first home or trade up for a little more space. This reminds me a lot of 2009 and 2010 when Obama, with unsurprisingly, at that time, Vice President Joe Biden on his right-hand side, President Obama did a first-time home buyer credit as well at that time to stimulate the housing market, which had gotten to the worst place it had been in generations. They did a tax credit. Now, I don't know exactly. Biden did not give a whole lot of specifics, right? $400 a month for the next 2 years as mortgage rates come down. If you buy your first home or trade up for a little more space. Not a whole lot of meat on the bone when it comes to that. But let me just say this, okay? In general, giving people money from the government in order to purchase real estate is great if you're a realtor, right? That, me as a realtor, a part of my heart is really happy to hear that, right? Because I know a lot of first-time home buyers who are struggling. And with regard to the trading up portion of that, that's interesting. I'd like to know more details about that. What exactly the president wants to do. I think the president's relying on Congress to really put more meat on the bone with some of this stuff, because the president can't do it, unilaterally. But that's also interesting, particularly, for people that have only lived in a home for a couple of years. Maybe they're ready to get a little more space to start a family. Could be beneficial for them. But I am against this proposal. 100%, regardless of how it would help me, and unfortunately, regardless of how it would help first-time home buyers, because yes, it would help them for the next 2 years, but what about after that? And I'm going to, if you're looking on YouTube, I'm going to screen share again here, and we're going to look at, oh, hold on. Sorry, the sound thing that I had going on. Man, that's a rough thing there. All right. All right, let's try this again. All right, if you're watching on YouTube, you're going to be seeing that I'm going to share my screen here, this time without sound, so that you don't hear the weird echo of my voice. But we're going to look at for a second here the market stats that we always look at, but this time we're going to be looking just at one quick thing, pending sales, and we're going to go back to 2008 to 2009. Now, if you are able to look at this graph, you'll see that from 2007 to 2009, the pending sales were plummeting big time. Big plummet as the world financial crisis or the Great Recession settled in. We had the standard seasonal bump that happened, in the spring and summer of 2009, still very low, still very depressed numbers. Then it really went way down towards the end of 2009. And then you see this big bump that happens in 2010. And then right after that bump, it plummets right back down to earth and actually goes down even further at the end of 2010. Guess what that was? That was the Obama first-time home buyer credit expiring. Guess what happened? It helped the market for about half a year, and then it actually made the housing market worse in the aftermath. Why? Because it provided artificial demand. Artificial demand never benefits the market, right? If you're going to if you are going to increase demand, you want to increase it organically. Do things that have organic, sustainable impact. Now, perhaps President Biden could argue that because he's doing this for the next 2 years and mortgage rates are in theory going to come down during that time, that this will that what happened back in 2010 won't repeat. I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because okay, here's what happens, right? When we saw that spike, what is that spike? That spike is literally inflation, right? We are trying to contain inflation. So what I could 100% see is that Congress passes something like this. The housing market then takes off as a result, perhaps in tandem with mortgage rates coming down a little bit. And then we see all of a sudden a bunch of demand enter the home sales market, and home sales take off again. Inflation in real estate takes off again, and now the Fed is in an odd spot, right? Because trust me, they're monitoring the housing data. They talk about it all the time. If they see housing inflation start to spike again, they're not going to lower mortgage rates. And so then what happens is when this proposed tax credit goes away, then rates will be higher than they should have been, because the Fed, without this tax credit, the Fed likely would have lowered rates. And guess what? Then we're going to see a second housing crash a couple of years from now. I do not want that. I want us to take our lumps now. We don't need to spread out the pain. Let's take our medicine now, take the pain now, and not defer it to people 2 years from now. Now, maybe if you're a first-time home buyer right now, maybe you do want to defer it a couple of years from now. I completely understand it. This is my perspective. You are free to disagree with it for your own personal reasons. But I'm telling you, for the nation as a whole, this is not a good proposal. Although in theory, it could be a good proposal for a select number of people over the next couple of years. But guess what? It might be good for you now. But if the market then has a crash in a few years, once that credit is over, what if you want to sell your home and then move into a new home and trade up into a bigger home at that point? You might find that you're in big trouble then. You might find that your home has lost value due to the government doing these things. So there's no guarantee that even for a first-time home buyer experiencing the benefits of this credit that President Biden is proposing, that they would actually see that benefit throughout their entire life, right? There's a very real possibility that within a few years, that benefit would actually have hurt them in the long run. And you never know if mortgage rates stayed higher than they need to be because of something like this. That can have a downstream effect on the economy as a whole, on jobs. You might get a house, but you might lose your job. So there's a lot of considerations there. Okay, I wanted to spend the most amount of time on that, but there are some other interesting things that he said. He said, my administration is also eliminating title insurance fees for federally backed mortgages. When you refinance your home, this can save you $1,000 or more. Now, I have a lot of questions about what he meant by this. Is he saying that title insurance is not going to be required for federally backed mortgages, or is he just saying that it's going to be free or not as expensive? And then the fact that he only references refinancing, I wonder if he's only talking about, did President Biden mean to say that you won't be required to get title insurance on a refinance or on a new home purchase? All right, let's unpack this for a second. What is title insurance? Title insurance is a one-time fee that you pay when you purchase a home that essentially guarantees your ownership in the home. A closing attorney here in the state of South Carolina, title company in other states, they will do a title search. Essentially, during that title search, they're trying to find, does anyone else potentially have a right to ownership to the house that you're purchasing? So while you're under contract, that title search is happening in the background, and they're going to be checking with the government. Does the government have any liens on your home? Tax liens, things of that nature. Is your home in an HOA? Does the HOA is the HOA owed any money by the current owner? And do they have any liens or judgments or anything of that nature? So it's checking for all of these things. Any entity that could potentially have a claim to the home that is under contract and being sold, the title insurance company, which in South Carolina is a closing attorney, they're going to be checking on those things. Once they have cleared all the title conditions, and they can say for a fact, everything is cleared, this seller can sell to this buyer, and let's pretend that you are the buyer. This seller can sell this home to you free and clear, right? That's what that term means, free and clear of title defects. At that point, then they can, when you close on the home, they can issue to you a title insurance policy. Now, title insurance is, believe it or not, optional for a buyer if you're not getting financing. You don't have to get it. You should get it, right? Let's say that the closing attorney or the title company missed something. And this has happened many, many times. If they miss something and you go to try to sell the property in the future, you might have some major problems trying to sell the property if some kind of a title defect is caught by a more thorough attorney. And now here you are needing to clean your title and clear your title of defects in order to sell the home. It's going to cost you a whole lot of money in order to do that, a whole lot more than if you had just gotten title insurance on the front end, because your title insurance will then go to bat for you in that situation and essentially, I don't want to say guarantee your ownership in the home because it's not quite that simple, but it acts as an insurance policy to defend your ownership in the home, okay? Now, when you get financing, there's also a lender's title insurance policy in addition to the owner's title insurance policy. The lender's title insurance policy is required. And so you have to pay, again, one-time fees for both of these when you're getting financing. And so this is what the president is talking about, eliminating title insurance fees for federally backed mortgages, by which I assume he means FHA and conventional loans, and as well as USDA and VA and a handful of others. So what does he mean? Does he mean that you're not going to have to pay for it twice, that you don't have to pay for an owner's policy and a lender's policy? I would have no problem with that. Now, I understand why the lenders have their own policy, but that doesn't benefit you as a homeowner at all. You're just having to pay twice. Maybe the lender should have to pay for it. If the lender pays for it, I'm sure they're going to recoup their funds another way. So that might be a problem with this proposal. Or maybe President Biden is saying that they're going to cut some kind of a deal with title insurance companies in order to reduce these fees? I don't know. If we're talking about refinancing, here is where I think this could be interesting. If you refinance a home you already own, if you already got a title insurance policy when you purchased the home, why do you need to get a new title insurance policy when you refinance? Well, the lender would say, because you might have done a bunch of shady things with your home during the time that you owned it, and we need to ensure that that you still own the home free and clear as you did before. Obviously, they're still going to do all that title work and everything, but let's say the title work comes back and it's exactly the same as it was before when you got your title insurance before. Why do you need to pay for a second title insurance policy and at least paying full price for it, right? It makes sense that there could be perhaps a price reduction or perhaps that title insurance policy would simply be issued without there being any cost associated with it, since you've already paid for it once before and nothing has changed in your ownership since that time. So that's an interesting proposal. I am in favor of title insurance reform if it benefits the consumer. I think that insurance companies as a whole are corrupt in a lot of ways. We already know this. But title insurance is one of those things that is important, but probably a lot of unnecessary title insurance policies are issued, and probably as well, a lot of fees associated with them could be reduced. And if the president wants to propose something and Congress wants to pass something, I think that there is some runway there for them to make some good reform that wouldn't have a major impact per se, but that would definitely save Americans a lot of money. If you add up all Americans, there is the potential for millions, I don't know, maybe billions of dollars. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's a lot of money that could be saved, and I'm definitely all for that as long as it's done the right way and isn't just we're going to save money by spending it somewhere else, right? I'm not in favor, personally, of them using taxpayer dollars to pay for these title insurance policies for different taxpayers. I don't want to see that. But if there's a way that they could negotiate this or perhaps reform some of the government-backed loan laws, I think that there is something there to happen. So we'll see. We'll see if they do something about that. Now, going on with what the president said. He said, for millions of renters, we're cracking down on big landlords who break antitrust laws by price fixing and driving up rents. All right. Not a big fan of this language, right? I'm not saying that there aren't big landlords who break antitrust laws and who do price fixing and driving up rents. But usually when people talk about this, usually the examples they give are bad examples, not real examples of actual antitrust laws or price fixing, antitrust laws being broken or price fixing actually happening. In fact, we're seeing nationwide rents coming down. Why? Because builders have built more apartments the past few years than they have in a very, very long time. So there's really a simple solution to rents going up and to the cost of housing going up, and it's much better than the solutions that the president has said up to this point in the speech that we're going through, and that is simply to build, right? Before John McCain, it was drill, baby, drill. If I were running for president, my slogan, it would not be a popular one, but it would be build, baby, build. We need to build, and that will solve really almost all of these problems. It wouldn't solve the title insurance thing. I think that's, again, I'm interested by that proposal by the president, but it solves these other problems, in my opinion. Listen, if big landlords are price fixing and driving up rents, what happens if a bunch of new apartments come on board? Now they can't do that. They can't do that, right? Because now the free market steps in and there's competition, and the competition destroys all those antitrust type of issues that come up. Interestingly, next, Biden starts talking about those things. Really, he should have led with this, but of course, he knew not to. It was smart by his speech builders to put this at the end. But he said, I've cut red tape so more builders can get federal financing, which is already helping build a record 1.7 million housing units nationwide. That's great. that is, it's always good to cut the red tape because there's tons of it. Now, I do have a concern about this that I'll come back to in a second, but I want to finish the final sentence of this section of his speech where he said, "Now pass my plan and renovate to." My transcript here isn't exactly accurate, but he said something to the effect of, "Now pass my plan to build and renovate 2 million affordable homes and bring those rents down." So the president does understand that we do have a housing shortage in the country, and I'm glad that he understands that. However, cutting the red tape on the federal financing side, great start. That's not going to fix it. And as we've talked about before, housing is a very, very local issue. And what I really wish that the president would have done in this section is I wish that he would have addressed NIMBYism. Again, most of you have heard of this term, but if you haven't, it means not in my backyard. It's all the people that are anti-development, anti-housing. I wish that he would have presented some statistics to educate the NIMBYs, because a lot of people listening to the State of the Union are NIMBYs, and it would have been very useful, very helpful if they had actually heard statistics to help them to understand why their philosophy of anti-development and anti-growth is robbing future generations and hurting us right now. But the president, he didn't address that. He simply, most of the things that the White House and that Washington wants to do to try to solve local problems, they try to do with a blunt force tool. They try to take a massive mallet and boom, here, we're going to solve this issue. Well, the problem is that a lot of the problems with development are zoning related, which is hyper local. Our council, city council, county council, municipals, related to their governments and their constituents and their concerns and all of that, and not related to anything that the president can do. And so, while I think it's a good start that he addressed the housing shortages indirectly, he didn't say that there were shortages. He just said they're building a record. He likes to throw out any. I didn't count how many times he said million or billion, but he loved to say words like million and billion. So any opportunity he had to use those big words, those big numbers, he was doing it. That's what he did here. He did it twice: 1.7 million housing units and then 2 million affordable homes. Not a whole lot of evidence that what Washington is doing is actually helping those things, but if and helping to develop more housing, but perhaps cutting a little bit of red tape on the federal financing side will help. But the president needs to acknowledge that most of the issues with building right now are local issues. And I wish that he would have said something to that effect during his State of the Union address. Now, as far as what Donald Trump's proposals are, I have not heard those personally with regard to this. We'll see if he says anything. If he says anything as well, I'd be happy to discuss what he says. He tends to be a little bit less specific in terms of his proposals than what Biden was in terms of these proposals, even though these are still not especially specific. Still a lot of questions that I have, but it's interesting. I don't want the federal government, to get too involved in the housing market. I think that that's a bad thing. I think that the Federal Reserve is already well more involved than they should be. But I am in favor of the president potentially doing things that would eliminate red tape, eliminate the government being involved more than they already are, or providing or eliminating situations where the government is going to be involved regardless, but their involvement isn't positive, and there are ways to curtail that involvement. I'm not in favor of just giving away money and causing inflation to skyrocket again in the housing market. So let's not do that. Please, let's not do that. That's all that I have for today's episode. If you guys have any questions or thoughts about any of that, please let me know, or you can simply comment by leaving a comment on YouTube, or even leaving a review. Feel free to comment on that. I would appreciate if you guys could do that. Like, rate, review, comment, subscribe, all of those good things in whatever app you're using to listen or watch this on. And please, if you need a realtor in the Greenville area, please reach out to me, or outside of the Greenville area as well. I have contacts outside of the area, a whole relocations department in my company. So I would appreciate if you guys would do that. Thank you for listening, and we will talk again next time.